Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Fireside Fireside Chat with two amazing authors and educators. So evolving education and leading the way toward a learner-centered paradigm with Devin Vodicka and Katie Martin. I've been looking forward to this conversation for days. At my house, we play this game of Rose, Thorn, and Bud, and that was my bud last night. I'm looking forward to speaking with these two amazing authors and educators. So my name is Jean-Claude Brizard. I am the CEO of Digital Promise. I come to Digital Promise from spending a few years at the Gates Foundation as part of the U.S. education program. Before that, I worked in two school systems, leading Chicago Public Schools, before that Rochester, New York Public Schools as a superintendent. And before that, I worked in 22 years in New York City schools. I did everything from being a science teacher to a high school principal to leading our high school division in New York City. So it's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure for me to be amongst all of you. Let me ask you, first of all, if you don't mind going into the chat, and some of you guys already are doing this. Who are you? Where are you calling from? So we'll let you get a sense. So far I see folks from New York, from Phoenix, yes, New York City as well. Please keep doing that in the chat. We'd love to see the folks we have here. See my friend Eric Burmeister just logged on. Good morning, Eric, from Menlo Park Public Schools. We're going to have a great conversation. And we'll ask you to submit your questions in the chat or the Q&A. I have a couple of folks who are mining the chat, mining the Q&A to submit those questions to us. Thanks to all of you who submitted questions ahead of time. I have those in front of me as well. So please, as we go, if things really come to you and you have questions for these two amazing authors, please by all means ask them. Again, welcome to our friends from Fort Worth, Watsonville, California, San Francisco, Chile, Vermont. I have a lot of family in Burlington, Vermont, so quite familiar with how Chile, Vermont can be. So, but it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful state. So welcome. With that, let me welcome our panelists. Let me start, first of all, with Devin, if it's okay. Dr. Devin Vodicka is the CEO of Learner-Centered Collaborative and the author of the Learner-Centered Leadership. And to show you that I actually have a copy of this book right here. It's autographed, by the way, from Devin. During his tenure as superintendent of Vista Unified School District, he was recognized 3 times as California Superintendent of the Year, in 2016 by AASA, in 2015 by ACSA, and Pepperdine University. He was named Innovative Superintendent of the Year in 2014 by the Classroom of the Future Foundation, and he was a 9-time White House invitee, both in recognition for district-wide achievement and to advise and partner with the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology and Digital Promises League of Innovative Schools. A longtime advocate for a more learner-centered model of education, Devin leads Learner-Centered Collaborative in its pursuit of its vision for education ecosystems that empower all learners to know who they are, thrive in community, and actively engage in the world as their best selves. Let me also welcome the amazing Dr. Katie Martin, who is the author of the Learner-Centered Innovation in Evolving Education. Again, got the copy right here as well too, and serves as the Chief Impact Officer at Learner-Centered Collaborative, where she leads the mission to partner with educators to define whole learner outcomes, design meaningful learning experiences, and create the enabling conditions for their unique journey to inclusive and equitable learner-centered education. Katie aspires to create experiences that empower all learners to develop the knowledge, skills, and mindsets to thrive in a changing world. As a mom, she wants her kids to have learning experiences in school that build on their strengths and interests. And as an educator, she is passionate about making sure we do the same for all children. She is recognized internationally for her approach to learning for both educators and students. She's worked directly with thousands of teachers and administrators in diverse contexts to learn, research, and support deeper learning for all learners. She teaches at the Graduate School of Education at High Tech High and is on the board of Real World Scholars. She served as a middle school English teacher, or English language arts teacher, instructional coach, and district-wide teacher mentoring program, which she led. She earned a master's in education, in middle school education, and a PhD in curriculum and instruction. So welcome, Katie, and welcome, Devin. So with that, let's just jump right in to the questions again. Thanks for giving me this amazing opportunity to talk to the two of you guys about this. So the two of you, I mean, maybe we'll start with Katie first. Give us a sense of who you are. I mean, I read your bio. They're of course impressive, right? Who are you as an educator?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. It's so great to be here and we're excited for the conversation. You mentioned I'm a middle school teacher, and I think at the core, that is still how I see myself as a middle school teacher. I love the kids. I love the teachers who choose to teach the kids in those schools. And I just think that the possibilities are great. Going through my education, pre-service, my master's, PhD, I was always learning about best practices to support young children, young adolescents. And I think that they really apply to all of us in education. Know who you are, get to know, build relationships, create authentic and meaningful experiences, and help people navigate their life. So that is how I tend to see my role as an educator. And I'm also a mom of two young middle schoolers themselves. And so I can't disconnect my role as an educator and my work from what I want for them as young people. And I always am saying, I want them to know who they are, want them to be able to navigate their own path and find what success means to them. And I want that for all of our students and families. So that's really what drives me as an educator and in this work.
Katie, that really resonates. I tell people that my life as an educator changed when my daughter was born 21 years ago now, almost 21 years ago. I learned to understand what my job really was. It was about my kid and every mom, every dad's kid. So I couldn't agree more. So Devin, who are you as an educator?
Well, it is also great to be here. So much fun to see familiar names among the attendees, and really looking forward to the opportunity to share. So a few things about me. I'm the child of immigrants. My dad's Czech, my mom is Dutch. They're both, they worked as computer teachers while I was growing up. So I've been immersed in the world of education innovation as long as I can remember. Also am inspired and motivated by my own kids. I've got two children. My daughter is 20. She's an undergraduate in a program to be a teacher, which is something that I'm very proud of. And then I've got a middle school son who is really into the world of dancing. So I'm learning a lot through all of that, but really happy to be here and looking forward to connecting.
Devin, thank you. You both are very busy professionals, yet you found time to write a book or two books and so forth. Why did you write this book? So what was the inspiration and motivation?
I'll jump in. I have been a friend of mine, George Couros, about 6-7 years ago, really pushed me to start blogging and was saying, you're doing a lot of interesting things and you're learning a lot. Like, I really encourage you to start blogging. And as I did, I really found how impactful that was for my own learning experiences. And as I started writing more and more, I started thinking, I want to share these examples and ideas of what I'm learning. That was kind of coupled with what I shared about who I am as an educator. I didn't go into teaching because I loved school. I was the educator that didn't really love school, didn't really feel like I was connected or motivated in my own education. And so I've always been looking for and thinking about, there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way than bubbling in multiple choice tests and, picking the main idea based on A, B, C, or D. And so I started finding out all these ideas and seeing amazing practices happening a lot in San Diego when I was working at the University of San Diego. And I wanted more people to know about it. I wanted to share what was working and what was possible, and think about how we as educators and leaders can involve in our practices. So that was the genesis. I never in a million years thought that I would write a book, But just as I kept learning more and kept being inspired, I wanted to do the same for others.
Thanks, Katie. Devin?
Yeah, there's really two things that I would say here. One is that, in all honesty, Katie was a big inspiration for me. You know, she told me she was going to write a book, and she did it, and it was amazing. And she really challenged me to do the same. And so, you know, she's a big part of that journey. But the other thing is that when I was a superintendent, we get a lot of attention for some of the changes that were happening in the school district. And I think one year we counted that we had something like 3,000 educators come through to visit, and they would often ask for more information. How did you do this? How can we do this? Well, you know, what really happened behind the scenes to create the conditions to change the learning experience? So I really felt like there was an opportunity to reflect on that experience and sort of pay it forward and share some of the insights and lessons learned through that experience of being a superintendent in a district where we really had some great experiences with trying to transform the learning experience.
You know, it's great that the two of you, you know, have learned so much about what it takes to create success, and the fact that you're sharing that with the world, I think is terrific. And Devin, you know, as a former superintendent, I was never named Super of the Year. Joe got me 3 times. It makes me very, very jealous. So I'm glad, frankly, that you did this as well. So Devin, let's stay with you for a bit and get into the pandemic. I mean, you were learner-centered leadership before the pandemic, and it was released during the pandemic, right? April of 2020. How does it resonate in today's education landscape? Anything in the book you would change?
I get this question a lot. It's really, really interesting. So the main messages in the book is that if you want to be a learner-centered leader, you need to create a sense of shared purpose, you need to promote active participation, and you need to use feedback to guide your progress. And, you know, so in the sense of purpose, you need what I call a framework for the future: vision, mission, values, goals, roles and responsibilities, and a plan. When it comes to inclusive participation, I write a lot about the importance of relational trust and social capital. And then in terms of feedback systems, a lot of it is if you really listen to learners and listen to your community, you find that they want an expanded view of success, more of whole learner outcomes. And so I think, if anything, the pandemic has really revealed how important those things are, particularly in the context of rapid change. So I don't know that there's a lot that I would change other than, you know, when I go back and reread it, some of the messages are, you might need to use this, or this is a strategy you might consider. And I think if I were going to rewrite it, I would say, you will need to do this. And these are things that have to be in place. So I really just feel like the pandemic has intensified the urgency of creating these adaptive systems and shifting from sort of a technical view of leadership to one that is much more relational, adaptive, and contextual.
That's terrific. I want to come back a bit and get into that more with you, Devin, and you as well, Katie, because I think the pandemic has highlighted in many ways what many of us have been talking about for decades, right? And maybe there's space now for more of that. Katie, you've got both 2 books, one written before the pandemic, one written during the pandemic. How did the context change for you, and how did you change the approach you took to writing the second book?
Yeah, I think that's interesting question. I think it very much aligns with what Devin was sharing, given that, you know, Vista was one of the districts and Vita, one of the schools in his district that was highlighted in the first book in learner-centered innovation. Many of those systems, those leaders, those educators who were leveraging the practices around relationships, whole child outcomes, really shifting professional learning to be to support teachers in personalized ways, teachers as designers. Those practices actually enabled systems to do better throughout the pandemic. They were ones who didn't have to go offline or send packets home. They had these systems in place where teachers were empowered, they had collaboration, they had the trust. So a lot of, even though it was written pre-pandemic, we've seen those be models of success. And everybody has certainly had challenges, but the ones who have had more success have been the ones who were embracing these practices and really creating these systems prior to the pandemic. And so what shifted, I had decided to write Evolving Education already in January 2020. It was my New Year's goal, and I started writing it, and I promptly quit in March of 2020 because the world just seemed like, I can't do this right now. I can't keep marching on like everything's the same. And I really started diving into different practices and how to support teachers online. I was doing a lot of learning myself. And as I really started to disentangle what was working and what wasn't throughout the pandemic, I was even more invested in these learner-centered practices, because I thought this is truly, like Devin said, revealing that this is what we need, the work that we've been doing. And so Evolving Education, I really wanted to highlight the shift between school-centered practices, things that we've always done in a school-centered paradigm, to really shifting to what things would look like in a learner-centered paradigm. And there were 3 parts that became really clear for me. And this is how the book is organized, that first, we have to really redefine whole child outcomes. We have to redefine what success looks like, and we have to be really clear about what we are trying to do and backwards design from there. Then the second part is around learning experiences, and those experiences that we know are anchored in the learning sciences around personalized, competency-based, authentic, and purposeful learning. And then the final part is around the enabling conditions, that if we are going to disrupt a system that has been so set in its ways and so standardized, we really have to think about challenging the status quo, navigating that change together, and designing a new and better future for the students in diverse communities. So it was certainly changed by the pandemic, not necessarily in the content, but it became much more urgent and much more just real, because so many people are dealing with the chaos of the pandemic and what it's done to our schools and systems.
Look, Katie, so you said a lot of important things here. Let's perhaps pull it a bit more, maybe involve you in the same question, Devin. I mean, I grew up as an educator hearing a lot about student-centered practices. I mean, that was the way I was trained as a teacher. Now we talk about learner-centered. What's the difference between learner-centered and student-centered for those of us maybe in the audience who may not be as familiar?
Do you want me to go, Devin? So you can't argue with student-centered, right? Like, that's, if you're an educator, you're in schools, we're there for students. So we definitely think that learner-centered is a wider view than student-centered. We think about the teachers, the administrators, the community members. We want everyone to be considered learners. And so when we look at the design of our systems and think about those outcomes and think about those learning experiences, it's not teachers and administrators sitting back and saying, here's what you do for students. We all have to embrace it. When we look at those outcomes we want for students, problem solvers, critical thinkers, engaged learners, empowered, we want to embody that as educators and administrators and leaders. And so the thinking about those outcomes for all of us, and then designing our professional learning that also embodies those same practices for students. I say all the time, if we want to change how students learn, we have to change how educators learn. So learner-centered really is just a more inclusive a view of all of us in learning organizations.
Devin.
Yeah, plus 1,000 to everything Katie said. I mean, it's sort of like the next instance of student-centered, right? All of the principles of student-centered learning still apply. However, what we've learned is that if you really want to empower agency for students, you have to do the same for educators. You have to do the same for principals. The district office structures need to change. So if we want to have integrity in our system and we want to do what's best for students, we all need to embrace these principles of lifelong learning. And so I think of it as sort of the ripple effect of being student-centered is you must have learner-centered systems and structures and a learner-centered mindset about what you do.
You know, you mentioned something, Devin, about teacher agency, which I think is critical. That was one of the questions we got pre-session. In terms of what does that look like? Why is that important in the learner-centered approach?
Well, I sometimes talk about it as like ripples of agency, but again, if you become student-centered, if you're really listening to students and you're moving through the process of, modeling and co-constructing and eventually student-driven planning, engagement, reflection, understanding, that is such a dynamic process that the ways that we've thought about the teacher role as being very, very structured and regimented with pacing guides and very consistent expectations, those things become at odds with one another. So teachers need to be empowered to promote that type of dynamic learning experience for each of their students, which requires that the teachers themselves have the agency to co-create, co-construct, and that they are shifting into a role of being a very an activator of learning in ways that are hard to centrally control or command in the ways that our industrial systems have conditioned a lot of us to do. So, and then from that, if teachers are going to have that type of agency, what you quickly learn again is that school administrators need flexibility and autonomy, and the whole system has to change if we're really serious about students driving their experience. And Katie, not to segue to it, but part of Katie's brilliance is she's done a lot of amazing work on how do you create those experiences for educators so that they can create, teachers create what they experience, is what she says all the time. And so how do you create the conditions with teachers to really promote those active learning experiences for students is one of the things that I think I've been learning a lot from in terms of Katie's work.
So Katie, why don't we just stay in that thread and just dive into that? And Devin, I'd love to your take as well too, because we have folks in the audience who are school leaders. We've got folks who are school board members, by the way. So a couple in the audience, and folks who are systems leaders like Eric Burmeister. So if you're creating the environment for teacher agency, again, on a learner-centered sort of an effort. So what does that look like?
Yeah. A great question and great conversation. And there's a lot of people on this call who are leading the way in this work, but really getting clear again on what those outcomes are. If we're just oriented to raising test scores, that's a different conversation. And, we've tried to, continue to standardize that with pacing guides, as Devin was saying. But if we're really thinking about these whole child outcomes, then we have to think about the opportunities, like I said, for teachers to, one, understand what their successes are. Evolving in education is not necessarily throwing everything out. We have a lot of great practices that have worked, deep relationships, lots of opportunities for students to make choices. Things are happening in many classrooms. So I think that being clear around those outcomes and what you want learning to look like, instead of saying, oh, we just bought this new program, or we just, here's the new curriculum we've adopted, being really clear on what learning should look like: authentic, meaningful, competency-based, defining that, then having teachers self-assess, where am I in relationship to these goals? What are the things I'm really strong in? And where are some areas that I need to improve, right? We all need to improve. There's always room for growth. But when you give that agency and opportunity for teachers to self-assess and reflect, and then the time, and then the resources, and then the expectations, then you start to see, oh, I've always wanted to try this in my classroom, but I didn't know that I could, or I was so afraid of not getting it right. Then you start thinking about, okay, I want to create these communities of practice, or create space for educators to find resources online, try some things out based on the goals. Then you're holding each other accountable for the outcomes and what's actually happening in the classroom. You're not walking in with a checklist to say, did you write the standard on the board? Are your kids sitting in their seat? You can't standardize that outcome from a district office if you aren't in the classroom, you don't know the kids, you don't know the context. So professional learning plans, and I would say evaluation, really need to change to be oriented to, if you have graduate profile or a vision, they need to be aligned so that they support those goals, not work against them.
Katie, thank you so very much for all of that. Just keep pulling on that same thread. I know, Devin, one of the things you talk about in the book is like the enabling conditions, right? Which I think Katie was beginning to actually get into. So as a systems leader, again, managing X number of schools, or as a school leader, to support teacher agency, to support this kind of effort, what are key important things that we have to think about in terms of really enabling the system to support the effort?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And you know, similar to what Katie said, there's a lot that we can learn from all of our experiences, but it's a balance of structure and flexibility that helps us to create these optimal conditions. And so when we talk about learner-centered education, when we talk about these practices, it's important to recognize that you do need structure and systems in order to effectively accelerate learning in the way that we would hope to see. So I think from a leadership perspective, a lot of that is, again, creating in terms of the condition. It's that framework for the future. Do you know where you're going? That's your vision. Do you know how why you're doing it? That's your mission. Do you have values that give you a reference for how to behave when you are navigating ambiguity? And that is super important, especially through the change process. Do you have clear goals? And Katie talked about how more and more those goals just need to be whole learner, whole child outcome frameworks. And then from that, do you have clear roles and responsibilities, and do you have a plan? And that plan needs to be very, very flexible in order to reach the goals that show you if you're making progress towards that vision. And all of that strategy that is really important to drive the system also requires high levels of trust and high levels of social capital. So as we're developing that strategy, we can also be developing relational trust and social capital by including our staff and our parents and our community at every step of the process, so that it becomes a shared container, if you will, so that we're creating the conditions for success. And then once you have those in place, it's about feedback systems. Are you making progress? If you're not, how do we adjust? If we are, what do we learn from it? How do we celebrate? So in a nutshell, that's sort of it. On our website, the Learner-Centered Collaborative website, we talk about these enabling conditions as coherence, culture, and connectedness. And those are another, like big three that you might think about.
Coherence, culture. It was a third one again, Devin?
Connectedness.
Connectedness.
Yeah.
Really, really critical pieces to all this. I remember just paraphrasing Michael Fullan, who often says that it's not the pace of change that kills us, it's fragmentation. So coherence is can be a big part of that. I'm going to pull Joey Lee's question from the Q&A, which I think is a good one. Say, to both of you, in your experience in research, what is a common barrier when transitioning to learner-centered and a practical solution? In other words, where do schools, teachers, and our learners get caught up?
I'll jump in to kick this one off. I think it's a great question. I think a lot of times we get caught up in what we have experienced in school. We get so caught up that this is what school is, right? We're all experts. And we think this is how school has to be. It's hard to change something that you haven't experienced in new and different ways. And close to that is the desire to be perfect. The culture of perfectionism in education is pretty rampant. It's not just education, but we get stuck that I have to do this lesson perfectly. And if someone comes in, my kids have to sit and behave perfectly. And I was just in a classroom last week, and the teacher stopped at the door and said, just so you know, the kids are engaged. They're doing this work, but they might look a little crazy and it might look chaotic. And she had to preface it. And we said, wouldn't it be amazing if she didn't feel she had to preface that at the door, that kids were not sitting in their seats and they were engaged? And the reason I say that is that if we really think about shifting practices, we have to be willing to try things out. We have to be willing to get in the messy middle and not know exactly how it's all going to work. And close to that is we often think of like failure. Oh, my observation didn't go perfectly, or that lesson didn't go perfectly, or the kids didn't pass the test. But I think of failure on a much more global scale, that if we're still doing education the same way in 50 years throughout the pandemic, as we were 120 years ago, that to me is a failure, because our kids are different, our world is different, and we have to continually evolve. And so we have to move past, I have to do things the way I've always been told. I have to do things because my boss or my principal said it was the way it's supposed to be done, and really start thinking about, what do my kids need? What are my actual goals? And what can I keep testing to figure out how to improve and provide the best opportunity for the students in my classroom or my community?
Thanks, Katie. Can you stay on this issues of enabling conditions where people get stuck for a second? You mentioned tests, Katie. I wonder if the whole focus on assessment, the traditional ways of looking at assessment, is a barrier. And Katie, in your book, you talk about whole child outcomes. Yeah. So exactly what is that? And both of you guys, do you think that the current construct, state and federal, around assessment is a massive barrier to really focusing what this whole child outcome focus?
Yeah, it's emerging and growing in so many different ways of how people are starting to really measure what matters, as we say. So for example, Logan County is a school district that we work closely with, and we've developed their profile of success, innovators, critical thinkers, global citizens, a lot of the things that, you'll see in a lot of profiles. The difference is we're starting to look at performance assessment, demonstrations of learning, and portfolios. So it's not ignoring the test, but it's expanding that view. If we care about all those things, we can't just measure the standardized test. We have to think about, are they having opportunities to demonstrate what they know and can do based on these skills? Student-led conferences, exhibitions of learning, but also self-assessments. Am I growing in these areas? What are examples of how I'm showing up? Thinking about simple ways of report cards. Could you add more than the standard? Could you add those skills that you care about, so that we can even have a dual operating system to start giving equal weight to the skills and mindsets that we really value and want to develop?
Thanks, Katie. Devin, any addition?
Yeah, just, I think this is a really, really important point in that we've had a pretty narrow definition of what success is from a school system perspective, particularly as it relates to these accountability systems. But when you really listen to learners and families, even teachers, we all want more for our students than just high test scores. It's sort of like necessary, but not sufficient. And so we did a research project where we looked at outcome frameworks to see, well, what are the commonalities? And what we found is that the more expansive models have at least 3 dimensions: something internal to the self, something about how the self relates to others, and something about how that individual exists in community. So we've created an impact framework which takes those 3 dimensions, and we call them agency, collaboration, problem solving. But really what we want to know is that each individual knows themselves, they have the power to act, they can effectively connect and collaborate with others, they can be compassionate, empathetic, they can communicate, and ultimately we need to be contributing to making communities in the world a better place, which is the problem solving piece of it. So we find that when you really look at the local definitions, they tend to include at least those 3 dimensions, sometimes with different terms. And in my view, it's important that those terms are contextualized and localized and, what's most important to the community. But you tend to see those 3 dimensions in most of these outcome models.
Thanks, both. So one question we got early on before the session was asking how you all are centering equity in your conversations.
Yeah, I saw that. Great question. I think first, for me, it starts with being clear on the definition of equity. And we see, I like the National Equity Project's definition that equity is ensuring every child gets what they need to reach their full potential. So if you see that as the definition of equity, learner-centered and practices really are, it's at the core of what we do, that each child knows who they are, as Devin just said, knows who they are, knows the skills that they bring, have an asset-based lens around culture, identity, strengths, all that they bring, and thinking about that. and then creating an opportunity for them to set goals, understand their strengths, understand their next steps, and have the supports and resources to actually move forward. And I think this notion around learning loss and all of these things that we talk a lot about, we have, in some cases, equity has been, oh, this, you need to get more. You missed school, now you need more math and reading or intervention, as opposed to, we need to know who you are, what you've learned, how you've grown, what your needs are, and create a plan to move forward. And I think it's not necessarily more resources. There's a lot of resources that we're getting, but a different use of them, instead of just extending the school day in the way that we've always done it, but using time differently to provide supports and resources to our students and families.
There's a bunch of questions again that came, looking at asking questions about the primary school versus high school, right? We talk about sort of middle school. So is there a difference in the approach, and how do you think about learner-centered in kindergarten, first grade versus 11th or 12th grade in high school?
Devin's looking at me like I'm an answer. I'll jump in and feel free to add. One, yes, I think it's across the board. You see toddlers and Montessori classes and, young kids being able to figure out what they need and make choices. So it is not about a grade level per se, but it's really knowing where the kids are. So I've seen great kindergarten, first grade, second classrooms in Kettle Moraine, where the teacher is putting up models of what work looks like at different stages. Students are checking their work, comparing where they are in relation to that goal. They're, picking a strategy and working in small groups. That's in kindergarten, right? Like the goals are kindergarten based, that are age appropriate, that are developmentally appropriate. When you get to middle school, allowing students to have that voice and choice, start understanding how they interact with the world, start understanding, things beyond themselves and their communities, and exploring. They have so many questions. My son may or may not have said like, hey, I think I learned more on TikTok today. I was researching these questions. So they have a lot of resources and things that they can access. And then we start getting to high school, and you have opportunities for, internships and community partnerships, profession-based learning. And the CAPS network has done a lot of work around that. But so there's more opportunity and more flexibility that you can offer as kids get older, but it doesn't mean we can't start developing that in younger grades and providing that flexibility and an opportunity to develop their agency and their ways to navigate their own path.
Thank you. So I have a question here from Eric. I want to make sure I ask. I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about technology.
Sure.
As digital partners, we have to talk about technology somewhere along the way. And Janelle just has that question in the chat as well too. So Eric Burmeister, who's a superintendent, asked the following question: how do you see the role of grading and evaluation in the process toward learner-centered instruction? How should we evolve, and how might we advocate for the system, in quotes, to answer the fears that arise from changing the traditional Carnegie unit standard most schools continue to use today? And I've read some of that stuff in your book, Devin, so I know both of you guys.
Yeah. Well, I think, this is a legacy practice, right? The way that we've approached grading comes from the late 1800s, and it was a system that was designed to rank and sort and select. It wasn't based on what we know from today's cognitive science about what actually motivates and improves learning. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us to modernize the feedback and reporting systems. And I'm just a huge fan of much more broader range of feedback systems. So, self-reflection, peer feedback, educator observation, qualitative feedback is a huge driver for learning. And I think we've been really constrained by this sort of legacy admissions process, especially in higher education. So we see great systems emerging in K-8 that focus much more on achievement of competencies and whole learner outcomes. And then high school, you see where systems use that, they often have to still do backwards compatibility into the legacy model. And so, I've written quite a bit, but I do think that we together as champions for student learning need to keep pushing on different ways of demonstrating success as it relates to higher education admissions, because that is a genuine concern for families and students and educators. And so I think we need to press on this and really think about a more holistic view of success.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that I like to think about it in three ways. That this comes a lot from like Tom Guskey and some other research, but thinking about where am I related to grade level expectations? That answers the questions like, where's my student, right? Where are they related to where they're supposed to be on certain assessments? That's important for families, important for educators to possibly know. But then I think more importantly is like, how have I progressed? Have I shown progress? Whereas like if I had students who would come in at second grade reading levels and they would have tremendous growth to fifth or sixth grade reading levels, but according to a cut score, they were still deficient. I want to be able to show that progress, and I want to be able to honor that work so that students keep going. And then the third is naming these mindsets and skills that we really care about and value. And in many ways, I think should supersede the grades, but being able to document, like Devin's, in self-assessment, peer assessment, teacher feedback, in much more rigorous ways. How am I demonstrating my ability to communicate my ideas effectively? How am I showing that I'm problem solving and understanding the ways of the world and using it to solve problems locally and globally? So if we're able to maybe separate them out a little bit, that could be a bridge to creating, and I see Liza's talking about micro badges, lots of different ways to credential learning as we think about ecosystems and we think about what's possible. But a bridge might be moving beyond a grade for a class to really starting to separate based on things that we care about in pursuit of better grading systems.
The whole push on competency-based assessment, I think, is a big deal here, and I love the push, Lisa, on this idea of micro badges. It's a really way of measuring professional learning as well as maybe student learning, right? It's a good way of doing that. One exercise quickly that I borrowed from my wife, I did with my team in trying to convince people that this is important. I asked them in a Google form to list 3 things that made them very successful in their professional life. And I said, they're all highly credentialed people. Not a single one mentioned their GPA out of MIT or Harvard. They all talked about, again, Katie, to your point, Devin, to more of a whole child construct around their leadership that really helped them be who they are today. The question, how do we capture that, particularly in what we do across? So I guess the question is, is there a place here for technology? Is there a place for ed tech to actually improve to support this kind of effort?
Yeah, I would 100%. One of the things that I've experienced in this journey of education has been almost 2 worlds, the ed tech world and the progressive educator world. I think, not speaking for, but I think we see this as those learner-centered really embracing the best of both of those worlds, leveraging technology to create more personalized, competency-based, transparent learning and to leverage the world, but also more progressive practices that allow students to co-construct, design experiences that are really meaningful to them and their context. And I think when we look at technology in that role, I think Devin hit the nail on the head, though. We also have to see there's room for improvement in how we are capturing and measuring learning and how technology can support that. When I look at grades for my kids, it says standards-based, but then it's like, 89% B or whatever it is. Like it has to translate for the technology to be able to communicate those things instead of being able to actively and more purposefully share what learning looks like.
Yeah, I just want to add, +1 to everything Katie said, but also I think in terms of equity and digital tools, just connectedness is such a human need right now. And, the pandemic has revealed that if you don't have devices and internet connectivity, you can be really disconnected from the world, and that's not healthy, and it's certainly not good for promoting anytime, anywhere learning. So I'm really encouraged by the recent progress around making sure all kids have devices and connectivity. And there's still room to grow, but more progress during the pandemic than we did before on that front. So I think it's really important that we keep building on that momentum.
Yeah, and I would add to that, building on the digital equity piece, it's equity of access is foundational, right? Everyone should have, and there's been some great webinars, and the C Summit highlighted the difference in access for students and what that means for them. But I would also want to highlight that beyond access, how we use the technology. So if you're using it to consume, and you're here, some students shared with me that they walk into a class, the teacher points them to the lesson of the day, click on the link, do the lesson, and leave the class. So they're proctoring the session rather than, and they say they don't even engage with us or talk to us or have that communication. So it's about how you use the tools to do things that tools can do, but also make sure the human element leverages the things that humans can do better and have that meaningful interaction. And then also the opportunities to use technology, not to just consume, but to create and connect in more meaningful ways.
Katie, we talk about the powerful learning gap, not just the sort of digital gap, but how do you leverage technology? So we're coming up to the close, and there really one big question I want to come back and ask the two of you. In writing the books, talk a little bit about your favorite parts. I know no one has a favorite child or favorite section, but I'm going to push that you help us understand really what really were the things that were really powerful for you in writing and wanting the world to really understand that you love these parts of this effort.
Well, I think for me on the second book, one of the things I learned was it was great to share examples and big ideas, but I really pushed myself to create more concrete examples and to really paint a picture of what it could look like. That's, not the only way by any means, but I wanted to share some concrete examples. So I'm proud of that, not just because it's my work, but it reflects the work of so many amazing educators that I've had the privilege to work with and learn from. And I think that by continuing to share and connect, it's the only way that we're gonna evolve our practices.
Devin?
Yeah, one quick one that stands out, which was a good reflective experience for me too. But I write about the story of VITA, this Vista Innovation and Design Academy, which was a really powerful transformation of a school. And I write about how it almost didn't happen because the idea that came from the principal for the school to be focused on design thinking was so foreign to me that my initial instinct was to say no and do something more conventional. And the only reason that I said yes to it was because I had a very high level of trust in that principal. And I think he had a high level of trust in me to even bring the idea forward. And that, is such an important reminder to me about just how important relational trust is in all of the things that we do. And really, I think that's like a main takeaway. And I'm pleased to see how many places are really embracing the value of strong relationships through the pandemic and recognizing that we need that to be at our best.
Devin, you trigger some things for me too in that conversation. When I said of connectedness, and I keep thinking about where a lot of us are today, which is around student well-being, teacher well-being, etc. I mean, talk a little bit about how both of you see this in terms of the whole child, whole teacher, whole adult kind of discussion around learner-centered. How is that supporting this really big sort of orientation in looking at student well-being and teacher well-being?
I think it just goes like hand in glove with everything that we've been learning and observing about supporting. I mean, our factory model of industrial learning was dehumanizing. It is dehumanizing. It doesn't recognize the whole self. It doesn't recognize our unique strengths, interests, values, our culture, our identity. And that includes our well. We need to have systems that are more learner-centered and ones that take into account that whole person if we want to really support one another and be at our best as people and as communities and as a society.
Thanks, Devin. Katie?
Yeah, I would just add on to that we're seeing, across the workforce, that more flexibility, more ownership, more pride in their work is critical to just being fulfilled humans. And so we can't neglect that in education. We've created systems where a teacher is bound to a classroom and a set of students, and they're locked in. And, I remember the days you can't go to the bathroom, you can barely eat lunch. Like, we need to create more opportunities where people can be whole at work, where they can have flexible schedules, where we can work more collaboratively together. And we're seeing models of that emerge. And when people have that chance to work with people who they trust, to be trusted to make decisions, and to have some flexibility in when and where they do their work, that they are much more engaged and fulfilled. And so I'm encouraged and excited for that in education.
Thank you. And I think I'll ask my last big question. I keep watching the chat, and folks at times are leaning on the policymakers, administrators, and others to create barriers. The folks who focus on accountability tend to go back to what's natural. So we know this is the solution. It is the way to go quickly to transform our education system. So what words of encouragement, advice do you have for educators, teachers, and superintendents, for that matter, pursuing shifts toward learner-centered right now?
Go ahead, Devin.
Well, I think there's a lot, but a couple of things that I encourage everybody to do is, one, listen to learners. So get proximate. We talk about being student-centered. You have to be with students in order to do that. So listen to learners, embrace a broader view of success, and work together to define that in your community. And I love Margaret Wheatley, how she says, the leader's role is really to ask two questions: who cares about this, and what's possible? And I think as you go along this journey, you're going to encounter so many challenges, so many novel situations. Just keep asking yourself those two questions: who cares about this? Invite them in, and then ask that group what's possible. You'll be amazed by what happens.
Yeah, I'll go a little bit more tactical, maybe even the classroom, that I think it's important for all of us as educators in this space. And I like how you asked your team, Jean-Claude, like, what is your experience? And really get people to get connected with their own experience, their educational journey, what it is that inspired them to be in education. We get so into lockstep, this is what I have to do, that we're not really thinking about what we are doing and why. So I just think that's an important conversation to have in communities. And then, really thinking about that experience. What is it that we want for learners? Get really clear on that. And then I would just say, we got to try stuff. We have to just get in there and start trying things. Back to this idea of like not being afraid of failing, really thinking about what it means to fail in a larger sense, and start trying things, sharing, and iterating towards new and better outcomes.
Thank you both. When you look at the fact that what we've been doing in the past really has not been working anyway, so why not try new stuff and do things differently? It's as if we're holding on to a construct that has not worked for a lot of young people. And I love the fact that if we were able to get these policymakers, those folks on the outside, to really understand how they got to where they are, they'll come back to the fact that they perhaps experience learner-centered education. So thank you. Katie, we have one more thing you want to say. Please go ahead and say it.
I was just going to say the policy people, I run into a lot of people are like, well, I'll change. I'm just waiting for the policy to change, or I'm waiting for my principal to do this. And I find that teachers, I had a lot more freedom. Teachers have a lot more freedom often than they give themselves credit for, and they're bound by this imaginary cage in a lot of places. So I would say try things, but if you don't think you have the agency, or there's some rule that you can't do it, I would say talk to your co-teachers, your principals, your community, because you often have a lot more freedom and flexibility than people often think. Thanks,
Katie. Devin, anything you want to add there? Well, no.
I was thinking the exact same thing, that so many of these constraints are constraints, right? It's from our own conditioning that we think that we have to conform to something. But when you really test, a lot of times the policy is more flexible than you initially thought, or there's a flexibility provision that you didn't know about. And so it's on us as leaders to do what's right for kids and to do what's right for our society. And the risks of inaction, the risks of failure as Katie framed it, if we just keep doing what we have been doing, are too high. So we need to lean into the unknown, and we need to just do better.
Last thing I'll add before we actually close is that what I have found in my career, and I'm sure Devin, reading your bio, you found as well, is that the traditional scores, they come anyway. So if you focus on a learner-centered approach, the traditional statewide assessments, you're going to get the scores. And we have examples of schools, frankly, who have done things the right way and have really gone really high. One school in particular I know went from 30 to nearly 80% proficiency in reading and math, not by focusing on the assessment, but focusing on the whole child or learner-centered approach. So thank you both for this amazing conversation. Want to make sure that you know what is coming next. I'll wait for my folks who are moving the slides to identify the next conversation with, of course, a bunch of our folks, Tom Rooney, Lindsay, Marlon Stiles, Eric Burmeister. We're going to pull on you, Eric, and Susan Infield. Of course, we're back with Katie again, with Kim Smith moderating coming up on the 4th of February at 10 a.m. Pacific. Thank you so very much, Devin, Katie. Thank you all of us for joining us today.